The clock struck 11:45 p.m. as the old church bell echoed through the empty streets of the small, secluded town of Black Hollow. The town was known for its eerie silence after sunset, and tonight was no different. The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it a sense of foreboding. Inside the dimly lit church, 3 figures sat huddled together on the creaky wooden pews, 2 girls and a boy, their faces pale under the flickering candlelight. The 3 of them, Diya, Meera, and Marquois, had been friends since childhood. They were inseparable, bound by a bond that felt unbreakable. But tonight that bond was about to be tested in ways they could never have imagined. "Are you sure about this?" Marquois asked, his voice trembling as he glanced at the large ornate clock above the altar. Its hands inched closer to midnight. "We have to do it," Diya replied firmly, her dark eyes glinting with determination. "We made a promise, remember, no matter what." Meera, the quietest of the 3, nodded silently. She clutched a small, worn-out book to her chest, a book they had found in the attic of Diya's ancestral home just a week ago. The book was old, its pages yellowed and brittle, and it contained instructions for a ritual known as the Midnight Service. According to the book, the ritual could grant one wish to those brave enough to perform it. But there was a catch. Only one person's wish would be granted, and the others would have to pay the price. The trio had debated for days about whether to go through with it. Diya, the most ambitious of the group, was desperate to change her family's financial situation. Meera, who had always been overshadowed by her more outgoing friends, secretly wished for recognition and success. And Marquois, who had recently lost his younger sister to a tragic accident, wanted nothing more than to bring her back. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, the tension in the air grew thicker. The church, which had always been a place of solace for them, now felt like a prison. The shadows on the walls seemed to move on their own, and the faint sound of whispers filled the air, though no one else was there. "It's time," Diya said, standing up and walking toward the altar. Meera and Marquois followed, their footsteps echoing in the empty church. The ritual required 3 items: a lock of hair from each participant, a drop of their blood, and a personal belonging that held sentimental value. Diya placed a silver locket on the altar, Meera added a small notebook filled with her poetry, and Marquois set down a photograph of his sister. They each cut a small strand of their hair and pricked their fingers to draw blood, letting it drip onto the items. As the clock struck midnight, Diya began to read the incantation from the book. Her voice was steady at first, but as the words grew more ominous, it began to waver. The candles flickered violently, and the temperature in the church dropped suddenly, sending chills down their spines. "Something's wrong," Meera whispered, her voice barely audible over the growing wind that seemed to come from nowhere. "Keep going," Diya insisted, her eyes glued to the book. But as she uttered the final words, the ground beneath them shook, and the candles were extinguished, plunging the church into darkness. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then, a low, guttural laugh echoed through the church, sending shivers down their spines. "Who dares summon me?" A voice boomed, deep and menacing. A beam of light suddenly illuminated the altar, revealing a figure cloaked in shadows. Its eyes glowed red, and its presence was suffocating. The trio froze in terror, unable to move or speak. "I am the keeper of wishes," the figure said, its voice dripping with malice. "You have invoked the midnight service, and now one of you shall have your heart's desire." But choose wisely, for the others will pay the price." The friends exchanged panicked glances. None of them had expected the ritual to be so real, so terrifying. They had thought it was just a silly game, a way to pass the time. But now, they were faced with an impossible choice. "I'll go first," Diya said, stepping forward. "I wish for my family to be free from debt, to live a life of wealth and comfort." The keeper's eyes gleamed as it extended a clawed hand toward her. "Your wish is granted," it said, its voice echoing through the church. Diya gasped as a sudden warmth spread through her body. She felt lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. But before she could celebrate, the keeper turned to Meera and Marquois. "And what of you two?" it asked, its tone mocking. "Will you sacrifice yourselves for her happiness?" Meera hesitated, her hands trembling as she clutched her notebook. She had always been the quiet one, the one who stayed in the background. But now, faced with the prospect of losing everything, she found her voice. "I wish for my poetry to be recognized," she said, her voice shaking but determined. "I want the world to know my name." The keeper chuckled darkly. "Your wish is granted," it said, and Meera felt a surge of energy course through her. She knew in that moment that her life would never be the Marquois. But as the keeper turned to Marquois, its expression grew even more sinister. "And you, boy? What is your heart's desire?" Marquois' mind raced. He had wanted to bring his sister back to undo the tragedy that had torn his family apart. But now, faced with the reality of the situation, he realized the cost was too high. He couldn't sacrifice his friends, not even for her. I don't want anything," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just want my friends to be safe." The keeper's laughter filled the church, cold and merciless. "How noble," it sneered. "But the rules are clear. One wish granted, and the others must pay the price." Before Marquois could react, the keeper raised its hand and a blinding light engulfed the church. When the light faded, Diya and Meera were gone, leaving Marquois alone in the darkness. Days turned into weeks, and Marquois struggled to make sense of what had happened. Diya's family had suddenly come into a large inheritance, and Meera's poetry had gone viral, making her an overnight sensation. But they were nowhere to be found. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. Marquois returned to the church every night hoping to find answers, but the keeper never appeared again. He was left with nothing but guilt and regret, knowing that he had been the one to suggest the ritual in the first place. One night, as he sat alone in the church, he heard a faint whisper. It was Diya's voice, calling out to him from the shadows. "Marquois," she said, her voice filled with sorrow. "You should have wished for something. Now we're trapped here paying the price for your selflessness." Tears streamed down Marquois' face as he realized the truth. The midnight service had granted their wishes, but at a cost far greater than any of them could have imagined. And now he was left to live with the consequences, haunted by the choices they had made that fateful night. As the clock struck midnight once again, Marquois whispered into the darkness, "I'm sorry." But there was no reply, only the sound of the wind howling through the empty church.